The Auburn Tigers are still number one in basketball, but how far can they go on this current streak? Welcome on into the Auburn Express, powered by the World 4. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for giving us a listen today. We're talking basketball, and joining me is my good friend Dave Shumate from SEC Unfiltered. We're here to talk about your power rankings, Dave. Your much debated power rankings. Great work that you guys are doing over at SEC Unfiltered. Before we get into it, man, how's everything going?
Going well, man. How's everything going there in Lee County on the plains?
We're supposed to get snow today, so
Dude, I'm about an hour from you over there, kind of on the west side of Atlanta over there, so not too far from you. I mean, you'll be getting the same weather. You're right. It's gonna be cold.
Oh man, look, it may be cold here, but Auburn basketball is hot right now. Let's take a look at last week's power rankings. Our friends Dave Shumate. Last week, Dave, unsurprisingly, you had Auburn at number one, but the debate for me. And I had this conversation with Chris Phillips, was over the second and third spots. Now, both Alabama and Florida lost the game. So last week you had Alabama at 2 and Florida at 3. Tennessee came in at 4, Kentucky at 5. And then rounding out the top 12, A&M State, Ole Miss, Georgia, Missouri, Vandy, and Oklahoma. Now, at the bottom of these rankings, Dave, I think you got it right. I don't think it's in debate. These are the bottom 4 teams in this league right now. Surprising that Arkansas is down there, but hey, so is life in the SEC. And then moving forward to this week, the updated power rankings. Auburn's still at 1. You didn't move Alabama or Florida. Both of those teams lost since the last power rankings. But Kentucky jumps up a spot. Tennessee drops down a spot. A&M falls down the rankings just a tiny bit, and you moved Ole Miss up after beating Alabama. Again, the bottom 4 of the power rankings, not that dissimilar. But the state of the SEC right now, Dave, is I don't know if the conference has ever been tougher than what we're seeing right now in your power rankings.
No, Mike. I mean, me and you were talking about it off air. How many quad 1 games Auburn could not only have but win just in totals. You're right. It's a wild year. The best this league has been probably since 2010-11, the Kimball Walker UConn Big East type back then. About 20 years ago. We're not getting too far from it. But yeah, but the big transition this week, I would say, it's like we're really on the back half of the league. Just quickly wanted to go over it. You tell me if I'm wrong here, Mike. It just feels like Arkansas is just going to be the biggest disappointment, not only in the SEC by far, but the sport. It's just 0-5, man. I mean, I even picked them to upset Florida a week ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a must win. Then you're like, well, they have to beat LSU, right? You're not like I thought certainly they were going to win, but it's like that's a must win if there ever was one. Goes and drops that, and then just gets annihilated in Columbia against Missouri. I mean, it wasn't even really that competitive once Missouri went on the run, came out quick. I mean, that is a disappointing team. Will they turn? I don't know. I just think this team. Go ahead.
I don't know if there's a better "the grass isn't greener on the other side" story than Calipari moving to Arkansas and looking at what Kentucky is doing, again, right in the thick of it, with the resources that they have there. Arkansas allocated to basketball, certainly, I would agree with you. I think they're the most disappointing story in the league so far this year.
Yeah, and I would even venture to say the country, but they're going to have to start collecting wins at some point. I would say, Mike, you tell me if I'm wrong, too, if you disagree with me. From the ranking standpoint, this update, would you say about 3, 4? How many teams do you feel confident in? We're talking about how many teams the SEC will get in. Are there any teams that you feel like you've kind of seen in it? I feel like that bottom 4 for me, 13 through 16, maybe you could throw in Oklahoma in there with them. Maybe there's 5 that you're sitting there kind of like, yeah, I don't know if those teams make the tournament. Am I wrong thinking there?
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. And when you look at the bottom 4, I'll pull this back up for our listeners, right? Like Texas is a tough out. They're a tough team. And so to be at the bottom of the SEC this year doesn't mean necessarily that you're a bad team, but the competition is thick this year. South Carolina, again, they're going to be a tough out for a lot of people throughout the year. Obviously, Auburn snuck out of Columbia with a win. But I think it just underlines how tough this league is, right? So somewhat of an honor. I mean, if we were handing out participation trophies, certainly there would be a couple for these four teams here at the bottom of the rankings. But in the middle of the rankings, you've got some very compelling stories here. I mean, who saw Georgia on the surge? They gave Auburn a run there in Athens. Road wins are going to be tough to come by this year, Dave. So if you can get out of any road venue with a win, I think you've done something in the league so far this year.
No, I 100% agree with you, Mike. I think Georgia is that team. I think Bruce Pearl echoed it post-game the other day after they beat Georgia in Athens. Like, hey, I don't think a lot of people are going to come in this segment and get a lot of wins this year. I agree with him. I think they're going to hold serve for the most part at home this year. They already have a big win against Kentucky at home. I think where I was talking a little bit when I was talking about my power rankings video here is kind of like both Bulldogs here, and I'm not trying to skip ahead to Mississippi State here, but Georgia and Mississippi State. We're both sitting there, Mike White, Chris Jans. I think both teams are going to make the tournament. Certainly Mississippi State is. I think Georgia will too.
Yeah.
But I think we're all both waiting for them to go get that big signature road win. You know what I mean? I feel like we haven't really ever seen that with them so far. And I'm talking about for Georgia, I was looking at their schedule here and pulling it up. It feels like there are three big road games you could make. All right, that is one that could really like hammer home a massive quad one road win that'll help you in selection. So that in Tuscaloosa, Saturday, February 1st, at Texas A&M, February 11th, and then potentially, what was I was looking at? I don't think they get the Auburn one. It's going to, let's go the Auburn one. I don't think they get that. It's going to have to either be in Tuscaloosa or Texas A&M or in College Station. Need one of those if you're Georgia. And then for Mississippi State, they still go to Alabama. They still have an opportunity from that perspective to go to Alabama. A win at South Carolina won't help them. At Ole Miss potentially could help them. And then that's it. I think we're missing those big road wins from those two teams. And that's where I'm kind of wanting to see them take that next step from that perspective, kind of that middle of the pack of the league.
Yeah. It's again, some compelling stories here. Ole Miss and State kind of sitting in the middle of the pack here. Ole Miss pulled off the big win versus Alabama. But I want before we close the segment, I want to talk about Alabama. Alabama fans were in a tizzy on social media at me for saying I think that they're a decent squad. I'm not sure I would have them in my top 5 in the country right now, though. Your thoughts on the Crimson Tide and what they're doing there? Certainly, they can score with anybody, but defensively, I have questions about the Tide.
No, I mean, I think that's fair. And I think always defensively under the Nate Oates system, they're never going to be, I mean, what was it? The 22-23 team was pretty elite defensively, but you also had Charles Bediako and Noah Clowney, two just premier shot blockers from that perspective. They don't have that this year. They are improved under Coach Adams, the new defensive coach they brought over from the Pistons. It's just strictly on defense. Like I mentioned, though, I think their defensive numbers are always going to be a little flawed because they play up tempo and just want to get as many shots up as possible at the rim from beyond the arc. Where that's going to give other teams more possession. So I think they're always going to be a little flawed. I'm sure Nate would want them to be a little better this year. But I think he's probably like, we're slowly improving. We just got to stay healthy. If I'm talking as Nate Oates from that perspective. Offensively, I mean, you see, they're not a great they're not a great shooting team this year. And I was telling some people, buddies in a group message, it's like, hey, at this point, you kind of are who you are. You've played about 8. Most teams played 18, 19 games. I mean, they're shooting 32% now. I mean, they didn't shoot bad at Rupp the other night. I mean, or the other day, 38%. But overall, it's that's a surprising one because I think they have some good individual shooters. Maybe when Chris Youngblood gets a little more healthy, gets more comfortable, he'll settle in. Mark Sears, we know we can shoot. Let's call a spade a spade. Losing Latrell Wrightsell, you're not going to replace that. He was one of the best three-point shooters in the country. So that is what it is. I think for them offensively, that's never a concern. Bama, for me, it's going to be about turnovers because I think they're a much improved defense, rebounding team overall this year. I mean, Grant Nelson, Cliff Amore, Jaron Stevenson, Modi Abad, they all crash the boards. They do a good job there. It's going to be turnovers. Me and you talked about it. I think the difference between them and Auburn this year is I think maybe when they're playing their best, Alabama has a higher ceiling. I think they got better overall NBA prospects if you really rank the rosters across the board. But I think Auburn is elite. Everyone on that roster understands their role and does it at an elite level, and it's not even like anyone else gets outside their lane. And I'll say for Auburn, I've said this on a lot of shows I've been on recently, I think maybe one of the most improved players in the country, if not certainly in this league, from last year to this year. Maybe it's because he didn't get the opportunities last year with Jalen Williams still being on the roster, but it's Chaney Johnson.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy's been a total X factor this year. That it's like he's exceeded my expectations for sure. Maybe there were some people out there that saw this, and congrats to you. But I didn't see this again. Maybe it was lack of opportunities last year with Jalen Williams on the roster, but I've been impressed with his maturity. I just think Auburn is a very veteran roster. They don't beat themselves. You're going to have to go beat them. I think that's why they're an overall better. I think in a series, Auburn would be Alabama because I think they would make less mistakes. As the series goes 6-7, I don't know. I think both teams would win a couple of games. But I think in a series, I'm taking Auburn because what they do well consistently travels. Alabama could go beat Auburn by double digits one night, and then Auburn could go beat them by 30 the next night because Alabama turned the ball over 25 times.
Yeah,
that's a little bit where I'm at. I think that's the difference between them. I do think those two teams, though, are the best two teams right now. But also, I mean, I love Florida. I mean, you've talked about it. I like Florida, man. Those three guards, Martin, Clayton, Walter Clayton, and Will Richard, dude, just a bunch of grown men, dude. They're going to be a tough – you tell me if I'm wrong here, Mike. I don't think Florida's ultimately going to win the SEC, and I don't think it's some bold statement. I think a lot of people would agree with that. And maybe I'll even go a step further. I don't know if they'll truly even be in it. I think the only team that can really threaten Alabama because they play Auburn because they play them twice is Alabama. And I think Alabama's got to get on a run here because I don't think Auburn – I told you, I don't think Auburn's going to lose more than 3 conference games. I think Florida is right in that same conversation, though, from a tournament standpoint. I think they have just as good of a chance as Alabama and Auburn do of making the Final Four because I like the whole overall roster. I just think that Missouri loss is going to catch up with them, plus add in too, Mike. They go at Auburn and at Alabama, so they get both those games on the road. So I don't think they'll ultimately really compete for the league. And when I say compete, like the last week, really having a chance to get into it. But I think it's Auburn's to lose right now.
Yeah, the strength of the league and the respect that the league is getting right now, I think Dave plays heavy come tournament time. Now, there was much ado last year about Auburn being a 5 seed and a lot of people feeling like they were better than a 5 seed. They lost to Yale, so it became kind of a moot point. It's just, you got to win that game. I don't care what seed you are. But when it comes to teams like Florida, to me, it's going to be how easy a path can you get to that Sweet 16? And if you're Auburn, anything less than a 2 seed with the way you started this season, I think is a colossal failure for them. Right now, they're firmly a 1 seed. They may even be the number 1 overall seed in the tournament right now. So, if you're Alabama, that's where you're aiming as well, too. You want to be a top 2 seed. When you're looking at the conference right now, could the SEC have 3 1 seeds? In the tournament, the committee has shown us time and time again, they do not care what happens in that SEC tournament, in that conference tournament, unless you weren't going to qualify
on a bubble.
Yeah,
you can play yourself into the tournament, but like you said, Mike, you can't move up and usually down either, right? It's like you said, it's weird.
You got to win it.
The committee looks for that tournament. It's like if you're already in the tournament, whatever, you're not going to improve or your seat's not going to go down, but you can play your way in or out of this thing too now.
Yeah. It's. I think it's tough. But right now, neither of the 3 teams that we're talking about right now, Auburn, Florida, Alabama, they're not even close to the bubble. It's going to be how high are they going to be riding going into that NCAA tournament? There's nothing you can do to convince me that either of those 3 teams is going to fall out of the conversation between now and the end of the regular season. But Alabama is the most intriguing team in this discussion to me. Auburn, to me, firmly is what it is. Before we started recording, we talked about their floor. And where is their floor truly? And that's where I have questions about the Tide. It's going to be a fun conversation as the weeks go on. Before we move on, though, I do want to talk about these schedules for Alabama and Florida upcoming. So we mentioned Ole Miss beat the Tide back on January 14th, about 6 days ago. They have Vandy coming to Tuscaloosa. You've got LSU, so 2 pretty manageable games. Then you've got
to your point there, Mike. Everybody it's like, again, there's not easy games in this league, but to your point, you can go find like a 2-game that week stretch for most teams on a schedule and be like, look, I mean, you can't just roll the balls out here, guys, and get the win. But if they're both at home, you need to win. You're right. Would be very disappointing losses. Either I know this is a Vanderbilt team that just beat Tennessee. So, I mean, I still think you would agree. If Alabama is not 2-0 this week, bad
it's disappointment.
Week.
Yeah, it's disappointment. Yeah. Flat out. Yeah. Got to win. After that, you have Mississippi State on the road, and then Georgia comes to Tuscaloosa. Arkansas after that. I think that we're building toward February 15th is the Auburn Alabama game, the first in the series. It's in Tuscaloosa. that game, I think, is going to end up being what we thought Auburn, Tennessee this coming Saturday was going to be. Tennessee took the luster off of that with a pair of losses here in the month of January. But, man, I'm telling you, I think that Auburn-Alabama matchup is going to be – I expect ESPN Game Day to be there. That's going to be one of the best games of the year.
No, you're right. And I'm glad both those games in Tuscaloosa and at Auburn are both on weekends this year. I feel like usually like they're randomly on weekdays. It's like, why are we doing this on a weekday? You're right. It takes away a college game day. Both teams getting the promotion from that perspective. So you're right. That has the showdown from a perspective of like, yeah, I mean, Bama, let's go knock on wood, should, you would think, handle business this week at home, both Vandy and LSU being at home. And like you said, that one that's going to really circle, depending if Alabama rolls into that Auburn matchup with one conference loss, is if they can get that road win at the hump at Mississippi. If they win that, they don't have a letdown against Georgia that next Saturday, which Georgia's, I mean, I think Georgia's a little different at home than they are on the road, but still dangerous game. That Mississippi State game is the one where it's like, if Bama wins that, you legitimately have like you said, like a mid-conference showdown where it's like, if Alabama were to win that game, you're like, this game may come down to that last game of the regular season where Alabama has to go to Auburn and the winner wins the league. If Alabama loses that and Auburn wins, I think Auburn may go win the league by 2 or 3 games.
Yeah. Mississippi State, a team that Auburn already 20-pieced in the last week or so. So we'll keep an eye on that. But look, if you're nervous about the game, Dave, visit our friends at the Rogue Shop. They've got something that'll help keep you calm in these troublesome SEC basketball times. RogueShop.com. Use code RECORD to get 15% off. Pain, sleep, stress, anxiety, whatever ails you in life, the Rogue Shop has something that has you covered. Our guy Richard over there, longtime sponsor of the War Report. We appreciate his support. Support those who support us by visiting the Rogue Shop for all your medicinal needs. Also, if the Rogue Shop gives you the munchies, visit our friends at Los Amigos Mexican Restaurant. You can find them at 1220 Fox Run Ave, Suite 200 in Opelika, Alabama. Great Mexican food there. Great partners in the community. 100 on the health score. Great place to watch the game. TVs everywhere. Managers over there have been telling the owner that you guys are going into Los Amigos and saying, we found you guys on the War Report. We love that. Continue to let them to know that you found them here on the Auburn Express. And also our friends at Manscaped. This segment is brought to you by our friends at Manscaped. Visit manscaped.com and use code REPORT to get 20% off plus free shipping. Again, longtime sponsors of the War Report. Join the over 11 million men worldwide who have trusted Manscaped with their personal grooming and care. It's the new year, so be a new you and take care of yourself, fellas. Your ladies will thank you, and do so with Manscaped. Manscaped.com. Use code REPORT to get 20% off plus free shipping. Continuing the conversation here, Dave. Auburn is the number 1 team in the country, and that did not change since they got that ranking. However, they had a tough stretch coming up after they got the ranking, and we talked about this before. The last time Auburn was number 1, they didn't stay up there very long, but they didn't have the non-conference strength of record that they had going into SEC play that they have this year. I feel personally that if they lose a game here, they should stay on that number 1 perch, barring a blowout of epic proportions. If they lay an egg, okay, sure. But close road loss in this year's SEC, I don't think should be enough to knock them off that perch. The Tigers started this stretch with South Carolina on the road. They won that game by 3 points. They were up double digits in that, let South Carolina back in. They followed that up with a 22-point victory over Mississippi State, 88-66, and then they snuck out of Athens with a 70-68 win. They've got Tennessee coming up this Saturday in Neville Arena. They follow that up with with LSU on the road, and then number 16, Ole Miss. What do you think about this stretch for Auburn? Their schedule has not gotten easier. Like I talked about the non-conference. In the non-conference, you beat number 4 Houston, number 5 Iowa State, number 12 North Carolina. You lost to Duke by 6 points in what was a terribly officiated game. You beat Purdue by 18 points on a neutral site. This Auburn team is really good. I think their resume shows it. Do you see a loss here in the next 4 games coming up for Auburn?
I mean, I wouldn't see. No, I don't think a loss, especially the Tennessee game. I mean, I really haven't been as high on Tennessee as some because I'm worried about their offensive ceiling. If I'm being honest, Mike. I mean, I think we see it a little bit. It's either Chaz Lanier or it's Zakai Ziegler. I mean, that's who they rely on. I feel like they could get Igor Milicic involved a little bit more. He's not. I just, again, they don't, and again, they knew this going into the year, but they don't have a guy that's like, hey, we need you to go get a bucket for us like they had with Dalton Connect last year. And they hadn't usually just had we've seen it pass with Rick Barnes' teams. Offensive issues have been their problems. And they did, last year was a little bit of an anomaly where they did have a guy that was a bucket getter for them when they needed. It was usually kind of a mix of Zakai, Santiago Vescovi, stuff like that. This year, though, it was going to worry me because I'm like, man, they can really – you saw the first half against Georgia. You saw the game against Vanderbilt. I don't know. I don't think it's a good matchup against Auburn, especially on the road. I don't think Auburn loses this game to Tennessee at home. Certainly, I don't think at home. Again, I've been on record. I think you would agree. Most people would. I'd be shocked if Auburn lost a home game this year. I think they're going to go 9-0 in conference play at home again. That's not some wild statement. I think most people would agree with that. So I don't think they lose Tennessee. At LSU, no, could be a little sleepy midweek game, but I still think Auburn doesn't really lose the game. Maybe it's not their overall best performance, but I think they still win the basketball game. And then I think you bring back home, or then you travel to Ole Miss on a Saturday. That could be a little interesting. I think that key would be if you told me how many times Auburn turned over the basketball game turned the basketball over in that game, I could probably tell you if they won or lost. That's the big question mark because Ole Miss does a good job of doing that, especially at home. So we'll see. I don't know. I would still lean towards Auburn because I do think Ole Miss can be deficient at times offensively. I mean, even in their win against Alabama, they weren't great offensively in that game. I mean, it either was Alabama. So both teams had times where Bama could have went and really kind of pulled away. Ole Miss could have done the same. They were just good. Alabama turning the basketball over, had a good game plan against Nate Oates in that offensive system. So give Chris Beard them credit. I just think especially Broom's back, which it sounds like he will be for that. I don't know. Ole Miss is one of the smallest teams in the league. I just think they usually get dominated on the boards. That's what Mississippi State did to them on Saturday. That was one of the more wild stats last week, Mike. Here's the two more random stats outside of just like wins and losses that were surprising last week. Ole Miss out-rebounding Alabama when Ole Miss was a bad rebounding team coming in. Alabama was a top 3 offensive rebounding team. That was a wild to me. And then Vanderbilt out-rebounding Tennessee when Jackson State, the last time I checked, was like 0-13 with Mo Williams and them, and they out-rebounded Vanderbilt in non-conference play. So Vanderbilt, a really bad rebounding team, but they out-rebounded Tennessee. Ole Miss out-rebounded Alabama. So that would be a shocker from that perspective. I don't know. I think Auburn is so deep and complete that like they're a bad mismatch for most teams. And again, I mean, maybe not a bad mismatch for Alabama, but again, I think overall Auburn makes less mistakes as the more complete team. If you made me take a series, I would definitely take Auburn.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about Auburn is, and you referenced this in our last segment. You've got a senior-laden team that is rare with some of the better basketball programs. A lot of times you see these highly heralded freshmen come in, Dave. Guys like Tahad Pettiford, and they don't last a year, a whole 2 years in college, so they're gone. Yeah. And you're having to replace your best player every year. What Bruce Pearl has done is he's gone to the FIUs and the Alabama, the University of Alabama Huntsvilles, and you find guys like Denver Jones and Chaney Johnson keep them in your system a couple of years, and then suddenly you've got a really good team that's developed with senior leadership. Tahad Pettiford may be the most talented player on Auburn's roster, but he's not the best player on Auburn's roster. And I think that is a really important distinction for the Tigers this year. Janai Broom is the best player, but he's also one of the most senior, if not the most senior player on your roster. And he's in the running for National Player of the Year. Dave, and this is the part of NIL I love. We get a chance to see Janai Broom at this level for one more year, whereas before NIL, he's probably gone.
Yeah, no, just to start getting some kind of payment in his pocket because, like you said, he's in his early 20s. So it's like you said, no, I mean, and I think credit to Janai Broom and Bruce and them and that staff. Like he's gotten better all 3 years he's been there. Like you've seen it each year, even from first year coming over from Morehead State. Like you saw it that first year. I don't know. I think I even saw an article. Was it with Dylan Cardwell? I think he was talking about kind of like how those two weren't really that close of friends his first year there or something, and they kind of developed and kind of like revel in each other's success. So that's good to hear. Kind of seems like Janai has become a better teammate. Then last year turned into one of the better players in the league. And then this year, just he's always, one of his strengths as a big guy's always been able to pass, but it's just like that's even gotten more patient. And he's making the correct pass. So it's like you said, he's just it's like Bruce said, it's like it's wild to say because he's such a good defender, but he's like, we miss him more on the offensive end. And I think a little bit on Saturday, you did see that a little bit against Georgia. I don't think you really saw it against Mississippi State. I think it's Georgia you saw. I think defensively, they're so relentless. It's like you said, and you got Cardwell as a shot blocker down there. Chaney Johnson.
11 blocks, I think, without Broom.
So I think like they're not fine without Janai Broom, but I agree with Bruce. I mean, he would know better than me as he's the team every day. Like, but again, I agree with him on that. Like it's like they do miss him a little bit more offensively, not just because of his scoring, but his ability to facilitate.
Yeah. He can stretch the floor for you. In the offseason, last offseason, he added, not this past one, but the one before, he added the three-point shot to his game, and he's a danger to hit a shot from out there. And when you have a guy who can be a big but shoot like that, he stretches the floor.
And he's playing, I mean, Mike, as you know, too, he's played beat up, too, the shoulder, now the ankle.
Yeah, it's tough. He's toughing it out right now. The Auburn Tigers, Dave, are number one. I have a sneaking suspicion when you release these rankings next Monday, they will still be number one.
Yeah, what do they have, one game this week?
Yeah, I want to see some movement, Dave, at number two. Damn it.
I mean, Alabama's kind of in the same boat. I mean, you talked about it. I don't know if Bama moves this week just because this is kind of the week. Again, not an easy week. It's never easy, but it's like the easier.
A loss this week would be a bad loss for the Tide.
It'd be very hell. That'd make the Ole Miss loss look like you lost to like the '84 Lakers.
For sure. Dave, I want to thank you for joining me to talk about the SEC Unfiltered Power Rankings. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, go find us over at the SEC Unfiltered channel, guys. Of the race to 20,000. Supposed to get it today. We'd have to have a couple of hundred of you. I don't know when this is going to be released, but even if we don't get there, we'd love you to go hit the notification bell, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Tell us where we can improve, guys. And you can follow me personally at Dave Shumate, SEC. And Mike, I appreciate you having me on, man. I love coming on and chopping it up with some basketball, especially with the run Auburn's on this year, dude. So I think we'll continue to have conversations about the Tigers as the season continues on.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of the Auburn Express powered by the War Report. If you want more content like this, please like and subscribe. We are the War Report on every social media platform. TW Report on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, worry.